right, welcome back. So, where now from here? Let's talk about this morning with Zoe Clark, Program Director for Michigan Public Radio. Chad, I'm kind of bouncing around here, but down in the lower right corner there, Chad Livengood, Senior Editor of Crain's Detroit Business. Above him, Dennis Cowan, attorney for Plunkett Cooney and the former mayor of Royal Oak. And there you see on the lower left-hand side, Portia Roberson, the head of Focus Hope. And Portia, I want to start with you. You and I were texting yesterday. It was an emotional day for a lot of people, but as Maya Rudolph said last night on Saturday Night Live in her role as Kamala Harris, she checked more boxes than a disqualified ballot. Tell me a little bit about what yesterday felt like for you as a woman of color.
You know, I think I have been surprised over and over again by how emotional I get by seeing myself reflected in the second highest position in the land. I mean, it really is monumental to see, to watch yesterday as she approached the podium and talked about her mother and how much her mother could not have imagined that this would one day be her moment. And I think everyone felt that. You know, and I think that watching all of them come on the stage yesterday, it just really, to me, felt like a reflection of America. It felt like what America hopes to be, in that there were all kinds of races and cultures, and we're bringing that full experience now to not only the White House, but also to the Naval Observatory, where the vice president is going to die. Yeah. So it was quite a day.
Zoe, it always feels kind of reductive to just talk about demographic happenings in elections. But, you know, when you look back at how long it took for a woman to find a place on a ticket, I'm going to assume it felt similarly to you yesterday, too.
Sure. And as, you know, a nonpartisan who gets to watch this both sort of from a journalistic point, but also as a historical point. I mean, you can't not feel emotional when you see little girls last night in Wilmington, Delaware, looking up at Vice President-elect Harris. And for me, I think it'd be the same whether it was, you know, a Republican, whether it was a Democrat, you know, a libertarian, haha. So, you know, that's going to be the history-making moment. But look, I mean, the fact is, whether or not you are voted for this ticket, history has been made this week.
Well, let's move into some of the murkier issues here that still await us then. Dennis, you've been a proud supporter of the president right through these past 4 years. But the remarks that he made on election night at about 2:30 in the morning were very troubling to a lot of people. It portends a fight that's still ahead. Do you think it's time for, you know, the old saying back where I come from is if 10 people tell you you're drunk, it's time to lie down. Is it time for the president to lie down, or is there really a fight to be had here?
Well, you know, Devin, first of all, I always celebrate first wherever they happen in political life. I haven't been a candidate myself. These are always tough elections.
Sure.
But the reality is, unfortunately, it's very predictable, Devin, that the national media and Washington Democrats have called for President Trump, the campaign, and their supporters to all lay down and play dead. Quite frankly, they sacrificed that high ground over the last 4 years with the constant drumbeat that this election in 2016 was illegitimate, and President Trump was illegitimate. So they can pause, celebrate for the time being. But yes, there will be challenges. The burden of proof will be on the Trump campaign. This is a process we've been through before. In 2000, the Republic survived. It thrived, it continued. So we will have continued some legal challenges, and those will have to play out. They're going to play out very quickly, because the dates, which can't be changed by courts, in terms of board of canvassers and other those others who certify elections, will happen very quickly in November. And I think we're all headed towards the December 14th date when the electors make their decision in Washington, D.C.
This doesn't look to be in a number of these states, particularly in Michigan, but it doesn't look to be a particularly close election overall anymore, Dennis. You know, people talk about how difficult it is to unseat an incumbent president. It is very difficult, and yet it looks like Joe Biden's margin of victory here nationally is going to be greater than Ronald Reagan's was over Jimmy Carter, which is so often pointed to as a landmark election. Is this election close enough to you, then, to be fighting this way?
Well, Devin, as in 2016, as we all remember, the razor-thin margins in several states provided Donald Trump with victory. I was looking this morning again at the votes. You really have less than 100,000 votes in several key battleground states that are making that decision. And with nearly 150 million people voting, I think we'd all have to agree that is a razor-thin margin. The Trump campaign has decided they are going to make challenges, and they have the burden of proof. Facts matter, and that's what will have to be before the court, and then that will play out in our court system and in our time-honored tradition of moving forward with an election. We also have votes are still being counted. We probably will have a recount in Georgia, perhaps a recount in Pennsylvania under their state laws. So I think we're just following through the process, and I don't think we're in any kind of crisis right now. We're just moving through the process, as both Democrats and Republicans had prepared for. I mean, both had, Joe Biden had an army of lawyers ready to go in every state.
Let me let Chad weigh in here if you would. Chad, when we see recounts, we typically see movement of votes in the hundreds, not in the thousands. But what are your thoughts about, is Dennis right? We're not really in a crisis yet.
We're not at a total crisis yet, but when you get margins of 150,000 here in Michigan, you're not going to change that. But some of these states that are in the 10,000, to 50,000 range, that might be. I mean, they have the right to ask for recount, and they can go forward with that. And John James in Michigan could still ask for recount, even though he's down by 60,000 votes. So the candidates have the right to do this. But is it worth the effort, or is it exactly going to be fruitful? That's questionable when you're talking about 60,000 votes and changing an election at this rate. And then there's still this issue of the electors. There is this doomsday scenario out there where, in Michigan at least, where Democratic attorneys are preparing for the potential where the Republican legislature tries to appoint all Republican Trump electors and tries to, and it's very doomsday scenario, but it's out there, and there's just still a lot of things that could happen between now and December 14th when the electors formally elect the president.
Portia, you're an attorney. You've worked for the Department of Justice. I know you don't believe that because you don't want to steal the joy of the people who believe they've won the race is enough to stand down. Are you okay with the president taking every legal avenue that's available to him?
I think absolutely, because at the end of the day, when the transition actually happens, and it will happen on January 20th, whether we get a concession from Donald Trump or not, we need to move forward in this country. And so I'm not concerned with people exercising every right that they have to prove to themselves either that they won or that in this case that Donald Trump has lost. But yeah, no, I don't have a problem with it. I think what we've seen is some tactics that were used, particularly at TCF in the last week, that were unbecoming of every party. I think that there were a number of people who were down there making sure that every vote was counted. There were people who volunteered to count those votes. And I think, the disparaging comments from the current president about Detroit and about it being a corrupt city and the fact that we were delivering ballots and so on and so forth in the middle of the night were erroneous and crazy. But that's been sort of the tendency from this administration to make these wild accusations without any basis in fact. But if they feel that they need to do legal challenges in order to prove to themselves that they are no longer president of the United States, so be it.
Zoe, the cold water to throw on all of it. In fact, I said yesterday on Twitter, I felt like a killjoy for pointing this out, but it looked to me like we had all kinds of super spreader events occurring across the country yesterday, including, by the way, Dennis, what happened after the Notre Dame win over Clemson last night. But Zoe, the reality is that we have a massive problem developing, as many predicted it would, with coronavirus, which is a reality both on practical terms here in our state, where we're watching cases rise, but a massive challenge facing Joe Biden as he takes over the presidency.
And Gretchen Whitmer continuing. I mean, we've been talking about historic turnout here in Michigan and the country in terms of voting, but we also hit some really horrible records this week, which was countrywide and throughout the nation, and here in Michigan as well, which was some of the single highest days of cases. And we know that the state house appears to have been kept in Republican hands. So that means beginning in January as well, Michigan is going to look sort of similar in terms of government, with a Democratic governor who is pushing hard on some of these coronavirus measures, and a Republican legislature that seems to just not want to engage at this point in any new mandates. And so that is unfortunate and concerning, and something that we will continue to watch in the new year.
In fact, Dennis, I'm curious as to how you feel the president's supporters will react to a new set of marching orders when it comes to coronavirus, should they come from Joe Biden, say, in the form of a national mask mandate. What do you see ahead, Dennis, in the fight against the virus?
Well, I don't see this just as a Trump supporter issue or a Biden supporter issue. This is Michiganders and Americans, I think, will initially react with some difficulty. I think we were, chatting about this before we came on, and everyone is very fatigued. Everyone wants to, get to the finish line on this. I think we need to hear, and some of the things that need to happen is we need to be told more about the safe and tested vaccine that is being developed, vaccines, so we can give people some hope. And I do strongly encourage the governor to please stop treating the Republican legislature like a leper colony and to work together. We have still not seen that, and it's very disconcerting. We're talking about unity. I agree with that. We're going to get past this as Americans, this election process, and we're going to move forward together, and I encourage that. But at the same time, during this process and during COVID, we need to work together, and that just simply is not happening from Governor Whitmer, and I'm very disappointed.
Chad, I've only got about 15 or 20 seconds left here, but why don't you address that, the schism between the governor and the legislature, which an election is not going to change?
Yeah, the legislature has not come to accept that the lockdown in the spring did bend the curve. The infection curve looked like this a month ago. Now it looks like this. It's completely a vertical ascent. We were at 6,200 cases yesterday. We had 29,000 cases in the last 7 days. It was more than we had in the entire month of September.
Yeah. It's a great way of putting it. Gang, thanks so much for the conversation. Really good to see you all, if only digitally. Thanks so much for your time, and have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more on Flashpoint right after this.